Hi, everyone. We are going to discuss Chapter 7, which is nonverbal communication. We will go over nonverbal communication and its definition and the characteristics of nonverbal communication, the functions of nonverbal communication, and then the types of nonverbal communication. Here are the learning objectives that we're going to cover. Again, we're going to define nonverbal communication, describe the distinguishing characteristics of it, identify and offer examples of the various functions that nonverbal communication can serve, describe how meaning is communicated through particular nonverbal cues. So first, let's start by defining nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is best defined as messages expressed by non-linguistic means. And in the book, it says, if non means not and verbal means with words, then it seems logical that nonverbal communication would involve communication without words. This definition is an oversimplification, however, because it fails to distinguish between vocal communication with your voice and verbal communication with words. Some nonverbal messages have a vocal element. For example, the words I love you have different meanings depending on the way that they are spoken. Furthermore, some non-spoken forms of communication can include sign languages used in the deaf community. And these are actually linguistic and not really nonverbal in this sense, because most social sciences say that these are terms. Therefore, a better definition of nonverbal communication is the one that they define here. And let me go to the next slide here, and we'll skip the discussions. What are some of the characteristics of nonverbal communication? Nonverbal communication is always occurring. All behavior has communication value because much of what is being communicated is conveyed nonverbally. You don't always realize when you are communicating things nonverbally. Nonverbal communication is primarily relational in that it allows us to define the kind of relationships we want to have with other people, and it allows us to convey emotions that we may not be willing to express vocally. Nonverbal communication can be ambiguous, and an action can generally be interpreted in multiple different ways. So, depending on what the situation is and what you do, each person might interpret that in a different way. In one study, they claimed that 93% of the emotional impact of a message comes from a nonverbal source, whereas only 7% comes from the verbal, messages that we convey. And you might think, why is nonverbal communication so powerful, and why do we why is that more powerful than the words that we're saying? So, I mean, think about it. Think about the conversations that you have and recall a time when you observe speakers of a language that you weren't familiar with. So, if maybe you saw an interaction of people speaking a language that you don't know, what did you look at to try to understand the situation? You looked at their nonverbal language to try to interpret what was going on. Or think about when you play charades and there's no, verbal language happening and you're only relying on nonverbal cues to communicate. So nonverbal language is so powerful in interpreting things that are occurring, and facial expressions, your gestures, your movement. And this is continuing with some other characteristics of nonverbal communication. This can also occur in mediated messages. So when we use emojis, and I know that emojis are extremely popular. You see them all the time now. You see them in text messages, you see them on Instagram, on Twitter, in all different forms. People love emojis. Here's just a brief example in this diagram over here. If somebody is sending you the same exact message, you are driving me crazy, and they have a happy smile, or you are driving me crazy, and they have the angry face, or you are driving me crazy, and they have the heart emoji. You're going to interpret that message completely different depending on what emoji that somebody sends with it, and that could change the message completely. I know that text messages can cause a lot of miscommunication. And so a lot of times, maybe if you want to make sure people know that you're trying to be happy or nice, you just add like a happy emoji at the end or a nice emoji so that they don't interpret it differently. But this can also make it ambiguous. Maybe you get more confused by what is being sent when they send that emoji because you don't know how to interpret it. Some of these might be clear, but there are so many different emojis. Maybe they send an emoji that you have no idea what they meant, or you don't know how to take it in the context of the message that was sent. And you just became even more confused than you were to begin with. Not These are additional characteristics of nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication can be influenced by culture and gender. And we have talked about this in the previous chapters and how gender can influence that as well. So culture differs in their nonverbal languages as well as their verbal ones. And emblems are culturally understood substitutes for verbal expressions. Culture affects how nonverbal cues are monitored. A variety of cultural norms guide nonverbal expressions. Females tend to be more nonverbally expressive and better at interpreting others' nonverbal behaviors than males. Men and women's nonverbal communication have a good deal in common. And then here I'm going to look at some other examples that it has in the book. So nodding your head up and down is an accepted way of saying yes in most cultures, or likewise, if you shake your head side to side is a nonverbal way of saying no, or shrugging your shoulders is a commonly understood meaning of I don't know or I'm not sure. Or but remember, like the thumbs up gesture, that can vary from one culture to another. It means good job in the United States. The number one in Germany and the number five in Japan. Most North Americans would say the hand gestures in there's pictures in the book that show some variations of the hand gestures and what they mean. So culture can affect how these nonverbal cues are monitored and the variety of differences that they can mean. Like in Japan, for instance, people tend to look people in the eyes for emotional cues, whereas Americans and Europeans focus more on your mouth. So these differences can be seen in each of the different cultures and vary. And then the problem is if you use some of these hand gestures and you don't realize what the meaning is, you could unintentionally offend somebody. And it maybe you went to, you thought you were displaying a gesture that meant something, positive like happiness or love, and it, actually was something that was mean or not nice, and that could get you in trouble. And then let me go to, so what are the functions of nonverbal communication? So we want to create and maintain relationships. We observe nonverbal cues in the early stages of relationships, and nonverbal cues continue to provide a clear sign of our relational satisfaction. We want to regulate our interactions. Regulators are cues that help control verbal interaction, such as turn taking signals in a conversation. Influencing others, nonverbal behavior is influential in many ways. It could capture attention, show or increase liking, generate power. It can boost credibility. We want to influence others. If you change your nonverbal behavior, it can affect the way you feel. Concealing and deceiving, many of the messages we exchange are not always completely truthful. It is not easy to tell when someone is lying. Liars can typically show more speech disturbances. Maybe they'll pause longer, or their pupils may be more dilated. So their true feelings can be revealed in some of these brief moments or these small micro expressions that they show. So if you really paid attention to this, you might be able to see it. And I know there's shows or studies that have been based on how you can try to catch people lying or deceiving or things that you should pay attention to. But deception and detection is complex, and you don't want to just jump to conclusions that maybe aren't true or accurate and just try to call out people about lying. I know that, people talk about how people's eyes shift one way or another when they're lying, if they're trying to make up something. I've heard things like that or watched shows related to that. And when we influence others, how we look, act, and sound can be important in meeting our goals and the words that we speak. And, the influence of our nonverbal behavior comes in many forms. And, for people are more willing to do our bidding, at least in the US, when we look them directly in the eye, or if you have high status clothing on, if you have open body posture, if you touch them appropriately and behave in a friendly and upbeat manner. And that's why, when we coach people to get a job, we coach them to offer a firm handshake, to smile often, to appear genuine. And this is a way to coach them to help them get the job. Some other findings that they have found as far as influencing others are, adopting expansive poses such as hands on your hip or spreading out your arms can increase your sense of power. And holding these postures for just 2 minutes can create a chemical change in your body and even higher your testosterone and lower your cortisol levels. And even sitting up straight can increase your mood and self-esteem or even increase your memory levels. So it's just adopting these different mannerisms can change how people perceive you and even how you think it's interesting. Okay, and then managing impressions. The process of impression management is getting others to see us as we want to be seen. There are several ways of managing impressions non-verbally. So one way is manners, refers to the way that we act. Appearance involves the way we dress or the artifacts we wear. Setting involves the physical items we are surrounding ourselves with. So we talked about in previous chapters that one of the goals of communicating is impression management, getting others to view us how we want to be seen. In many cases, nonverbal cues can be more important than verbal messages in creating this impression that we're trying to hold. To appreciate how we manage impressions via nonverbal means, consider what happens when you meet strangers you would like to get to know better. Instead of projecting your image verbally, like, hey, I'm attractive, I'm friendly, I'm this, you might behave in ways in ways that will present this identity. For example, you might dress in a fashionable way, or you might dress nice, or in a way that you think is going to get their attention. You might smile a lot, or appear friendly or approachable, or maybe you know, your pose is going to seem relaxed, or you know, in a manner that the person can easily come up and talk to you. So these are ways that you're adapting your body language to appear and manage your impression. And you might even make direct eye contact, or have a friendly handshake like we talked about. And in the setting, you might, if it's like, say, your office or your house, then you're going to control the things around you. I know if I have people come over to my house, I'm going to clean my house. I'm going to make it look nice. I'm going to maybe get some food out for people to eat, and try to be a good host. I don't want people to come over to my house and it'd be a mess, or, not be a good hostess. I'm going to try to get some drinks out that people are going to like, try to figure out what they like. So that's a way of managing impressions as well, because you want to, appear like you're being nice to people, and that you're being accommodating to things that they like. I might ask them, "Oh, what type of things do you like to drink? What type of foods do you like? Is there anything that you dislike?" I mean, to me, that's just being kind as well. So, what are some other types of nonverbal communication? Body movement is a primary type of nonverbal communication. When my students take public speaking, this is something that I always talk about. Unconsciously, people will move around when they get nervous, or they might not look at the audience. They might stare at a point randomly in the room. They might stare at me, which is extremely uncomfortable if somebody's giving a speech in a group of people and they're just like staring at me. So body movement is a primary type of nonverbal communication. Uh, and how you move around, your face, your eyes, your posture. Face and eyes are the most noticeable part of the body. The study of the eyes can communicate. The study of how the eyes can communicate is known as acoustics. I don't know if I can say it right. Some of this stuff when I try to pronounce it, I'm like, oh, is that correct? Humans want and need facial responses from others. So, for example, if you were talking to me, I was just blank staring at you, no response, no facial movement, you're probably going to feel uncomfortable. Maybe you're going to think that I'm just not listening to you. It's going to be really awkward. So you want a facial response when you're talking to people. Posture reveals how people feel about themselves and others. Gestures are a fundamental element of communication, both intentional and unconscious. And touch, haptics is the term used to describe the studying of touching. Touch plays a large part in how we respond to others as well. Touch improves infants' development, enhances mother and child bonding, and it improves compliance and is related to career effectiveness. So that can make a big difference. Voice factors comprise of rate, tempo, volume, pitch, and tone. Paralanguage describes the way a message is spoken. Unintentional pauses occur when people stop to collect their thoughts before deciding how best to contain their verbal message. Vocalized pauses ranges from ooh, or filler words like, oh, okay, they can sometimes reduce perceived credibility and should be avoided. A lot of times people do that without realizing they're doing it. When I teach public speaking, I will have people record themselves and look back on it to see if they do a lot of or like, or use another filler word repetitively. it can be difficult because that is generally a nervous habit or something that you're not realizing that you're doing. It takes practice to not do that and to practice doing a pause. A lot of times people want to just fill the void if they feel uncomfortable or awkward with words, and they don't like to have a pause, I think, because I think that they feel like the pause is a bad thing, especially when they're giving a speech and a lot of people are staring at them. They feel nervous and uncomfortable. In North America, making eye contact is generally regarded as favorable. Those who look others in the eye are perceived as intelligent, and experts have found a strong correlation between eye contact and interpersonal closeness. Unfortunately, those same experts, they say that mobile devices interfere with eye contact. Research also suggests that the overuse of technology can dull interpersonal perceptiveness. I'm not surprised by that. I have mentioned previously that if you've gone into a restaurant and seen people sitting at a booth or a table and nobody's talking to each other, they're just staring at their phone and not aware of anything that's happening around them because they're focused on what's happening on their phone and not talking to anybody else. I think that technology is good and bad, but when you're in public and only focused on your phone and not talking to people around you, then that can be a problem. Or, only focused about posting on social media or taking a picture or whatever it may be. Next, we start to talk about distance and the study of how communication is affected by the use, organization, and perception of space and distance. So each of us carries around a sort of invisible bubble, and my bubble is probably going to be a little bit different than your bubble, and how comfortable you feel with people invading that bubble and personal space. We think of an area inside the bubble as our own, almost part of our body. Our personal bubble is going to vary according to our culture or maybe the particular situation and the relationship, how comfortable you feel. In one study, researchers tested over 100 married couples, asking partners to walk towards one another and stop when they reached a comfortable conversational distance. Then they gave each partner a battery of tests to measure their marital intimacy, desire for change, and potential for divorce. The researchers discovered that there was a strong relationship between the distance and marital happiness. The average space between distressed couples was about 25% greater than between the satisfied partners. On average, the happy couple stood about 11.4 inches apart, whereas the distance between unhappy spouses stood about 14.8 inches apart, which I think that's really interesting that was linked to how happy or comfortable they felt, the distance that they wanted the person close to them and intimacy, and it was linked. Edward Hall found that there are four distance zones, typically for North American communicators. We have an intimate distance and skin contact. So it starts at skin contact and out to about 18 inches. This is reserved for people who are emotionally close to us and mostly in private situations. Then we have a personal distance. This ranges from about 18 inches to 4 feet. We have social distances, which ranges from 4 feet to 12 feet. You have public distance, which goes outward from 12 feet. And when our spatial bubble is invaded, we might respond with a barrier behavior, which are strategies that we design to create a barrier between ourselves and others. And you can probably think of a time when you might have encountered situations when somebody has invaded this personal space and made you feel uncomfortable. I know that I can think of times when I have felt uncomfortable. So, territory is a stationary area that we claim. So this is not our invisible bubble that we're talking about. So we will respond to perceived violations of our territorial area, though, when people enter it and get upset about it. So an example of this, let me go back. So it's territoriality, if I can say it. There we go. So whereas personal space is an invisible bubble we carry around, territory is a stationary area we claim. So Robert Sommer watched students in a college library and found that there is a definite pattern for people who want to study alone. Although the library was uncrowded, students almost always chose corner seats at one of the empty rectangle tables. After each table was occupied by one reader, new readers would choose a seat at the opposite side at the far end, thus keeping the maximum distance between themselves and the other readers. One of Summer's associates tried violating these unspoken rules by sitting next to and across from other female readers when more distant seats were available. She found that the approached women reacted defensively, signaling their discomfort through shifts in posture, gesturing, or even moving away. Consider how you would react if someone took your seat in one of your classes. Even though the chair is not your possession, you probably have a sense of ownership about it. How would you respond to a perceived violation depends on who enters it and who uses your territory. A friend might be less threatening than a stranger, and why they do so. If it's a mistake, you might respond differently rather than a planned attack, or is kind of how they have in here. It also depends on what territory is entered or used. You may care more about a territory over which you have exclusive rights, such as your bedroom, than a territory in a public area, such as a seat in your class. So that's what they're saying about the territory that you claim in an area. So I know I've encountered this. I've seen when I've taught in person that people do claim the seats that they want, and usually they always sit there and for the rest of the semester. And if somebody does sit in that seat, they do get upset or annoyed, and they will become agitated if it's moved or somebody else is in that area. So I have seen that firsthand as an example happen. So time, and we study how humans use and structure time. And so monochronic cultures emphasize punctuality, schedules, completing one task at a time. Polychronic cultures favor flexible schedules in which multiple tasks are pursued at the same time. So the use of time depends greatly on these different cultures. So in North America, German and Swiss culture, they look at monochronic time, which is more focused on the punctuality, schedules, and completing one task at a time, versus in South American cultures and some Arab cultures, they are more in the polychronic with the flexible schedules and multiple tasks pursued at other times. One psychologist discovered the difference between North and South America attitudes when teaching at a university in Brazil. He found that some students arrived halfway through a 2-hour class, and that most of them stayed put and kept asking questions when the class was scheduled to end. A half hour after the official end of the period, the professor finally closed off the discussion because there was no indication that the students were going to leave at any point. So even within the same geographic area, different groups established their own rules about the use of the time. So consider your own experience in school. Some instructors begin and end class and they're very punctual about it, whereas others are more casual. With some people, you feel comfortable talking for hours in person or on the phone. With other, time seems precious and you don't want to waste it. So time can be a marker not only of status and culture, but also of relationships. Research shows that the amount of time spent with a relational partner sends an important message about how much you value that person. And so that is all for this chapter. We looked at defining nonverbal communication, describing the distinguishing characters of nonverbal communication. We identified and offered examples of various functions that nonverbal communication can serve. We described how meaning is communicated through particular nonverbal cues. And thank you very much.